Joining us now is UWL political professor Joe Heim to talk about this. We'll get to both sides of the debate, but first, is this law constitutional?
You're asking me that? I'm not a lawyer, luckily. If you ask me, the answer is statistically, quantitatively, based on past experiences and past court decisions, the answer is no.
So do you think, as this gets it, how high through the courts does this have to go before it's finally just?
I don't doubt that this one will go to the federal appellate courts and then to the Supreme Court. And I'm guessing that based on prior experience, there was a law in Indiana a number of years ago that was passed that Wisconsin's law was patterned after, and the Supreme Court declared that constitutional. Based on that, that's my knowledge of law. Mm-hmm. Based on that, I think this one is probably constitutional. It really sets a different standard. It's looking for discrimination differently than past discrimination, which is primarily directed at minorities. But the argument is statistically that minorities vote lesser percentages, therefore it's harder for them to get the ID card. For elderly, for younger people, basically, and other categories of people, it's harder for them to get the ID card. So the argument is it's discriminatory. Well, statistics may be showing that, but whether or not that is going to hit the threshold of real discrimination remains to be seen.
Now, one of the reasons supporters like this law, the voter ID law, is because it cuts down on, at least that's the goal, is to cut down on voter fraud. Is voter fraud a big enough problem where we need to pass a sweeping law like this?
No, it isn't. That's, the reality is we have
quick answer, yeah.
Yeah, but in Wisconsin, voter fraud is less than 1/10 of 1%, at least based on prior studies and prior investigations of it, basically. And most of that has to do with people who are felons who are voting that shouldn't be voting. The vast majority of other types of fraud really just simply don't exist. This is true for most states and most studies that have ever been done in the United States.
I think lots of people are going to say, well, it's not that difficult. Most people have a photo ID, and if you don't have it, the state makes it easy. Why not just go out and get a photo ID?
For some people, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. In the state of Wisconsin, for example, you might live in a rural area in Wisconsin. You might have to get your ID card, for example, from a Department of Transportation office. It's only open, it's an hour from your house. It's only open maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. Mm-hmm. It's a burden, basically, for you to go get that card. There are other people that don't have birth certificates, believe it or not, and they've been voting for decades, and now they don't have a birth certificate. They might have a real hard time getting that card.
Another argument people who don't like this law is we only have about 50% voting as is in this country. We don't want to make it harder for people to vote overall. That's
my argument. I've always believed that the more people that vote, the better. That's what democracy is all about. Mm-hmm. I think you should remove barriers from voting. Unless there's some evidence that that there is some clear fraud, I think that the more people that vote, the better off we all are.
Everyone says, and this is my final question, but everyone says that this is just political. It has nothing to do with fraud. It has nothing to do with disenfranchising voters, because one party seems to always favor one side, another party seems to favor the other.
Well, the groups that they're talking about being discriminated against tend to vote Democratic. Therefore, all the Democrats are in favor of eliminating voter ID, and all the Republicans are in favor. I say all, it's a little excessive. Are in favor of voter ID because they both see political gain from it. There is no doubt that underlying all this is politics.
All right, we'll keep an eye on the courts. Joe, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.